central Pennsylvania in the early 20th century, the belief and practice of folk magic, such as powwowing, was a common custom. Folk magic was a reminder of less civilized and educated times, and most practitioners of folk magic were just seen as backwards or ignorant. That all changed at Rehmeyer's Hollow, also known as Hex Hollow, in 1928 when a brutal murder connected to folk magic rocked the nation. Folk magic practitioners were now seen as dangerous. As always, this video contains graphic content that may not be suitable for sensitive viewers or those under 18. Viewer discretion is advised. Powwowing is a system of traditional medicine and folk magic that originated in the culture of the Pennsylvania Dutch, who used folk magic in healing rituals to gain physical or spiritual protection and granted the user good luck. These folk traditions still continue to this day in both rural and urban areas, but are not as well known or loved as they were in the 20th century. The story of Rehmeyer's Hollow begins in 1895, with the birth of one John Blymeyer, whose family had been powwowers for at least 3 generations. But it is thought that the practice goes much further back into their family line. Blymeyer began the practice of powwow at a young age, and despite doing poorly in school, Blymeyer was an accomplished powwower who was known for his reputation of healing the townsfolk. But despite his success as a healer, Blymeyer started to believe that there was something hanging over him, something evil. Blymeyer began working for a cigar factory where his luck started to turn bad. He had fallen ill and held the belief that a practitioner of hex magic was wildly jealous of him and had placed a hex on him. Blymeyer found himself unable to work his powwow magic and also found himself unable to sleep or eat as he usually would. He attempted to use charms to remove the hex he believed been placed on him, but was unsuccessful and continued to suffer from various ailments. Blymeyer chalked his inability to remove the hex on himself due to the belief that it's hard or impossible to remove a hex if you don't know the identity of the individual who had hexed you in the first place. One evening, Blymeyer was lying in bed after having yet another sleepless night, and the clock struck midnight. As the clock struck midnight, an owl outside hooted 7 times, and it came to Blymeyer's mind that he had been hexed by the spirit of his great-grandfather Jacob. Jacob had been the 7th son of a 7th son. 7 sons of 7 sons were thought to be powerful magical practitioners who possessed special powers that could be used for good or evil. Since fighting against a hex perpetuated by a spirit was nigh impossible, the only recourse for Blymeyer was to leave his ancestral family home, and it seemed to work for a time. After moving from the family home where his great-grandfather was buried, Blymeyer met a young woman named Lily, and they quickly married. Blymeyer and his wife had 2 children, but both unfortunately died in infancy, reigniting Blymeyer's belief that he had been hexed. This time, Blymeyer was unable to find the source of the hex, and soon turned to other local powwowers for their help. Another powwower at the time, Andrew Lenhart, convinced Blymeyer that the source of the hex was someone he knew well. Lenhart's insistence that the hexer was someone he knew fueled suspicions from Blymeyer to suspect everyone he knew, including his wife Lily. Lily feared for her safety, and for good reason. Years prior, another client of Andrew Lenhart had murdered her husband after getting information similar to that of what Blymeyer had received from Lenhart. The woman, Sally Jane Heege, hired Lenhart to drive the witches from her home, and in turn, shot her husband Irving. Sally later committed suicide in jail. After speaking to her lawyers, Blymeyer's wife Lily managed to obtain a judge's order to have her husband committed to an asylum. After having her husband committed, Lily filed for divorce and it was granted immediately. After nearly 2 months of time in the asylum, Blymeyer walked out the door and vanished. No one at the asylum even bothered to look for him. After leaving the asylum, Blymeyer went back to work at the cigar factory, where he met multiple people who also believed they were victims of hexes placed against them or their families. This only heightened Blymeyer's belief in spells, hexes, and he became convinced that someone was out to get him. Blymeyer continued speaking with fellow powwowers, and was desperately searching for a way to remove the hex he believed was lording over him. Enter powwower Nellie Knoll, also known as the River Witch of Marietta. Knoll was an elderly woman who was a well-known powwower in the area, and she quickly identified the source of the hex placed upon Blymeyer. It had come from a member of the Rehmeyer family, who Blymeyer was a distant relative of. Blymeyer pried at Knoll, needing to know exactly who had placed this insufferable hex on him, and she identified Nelson Rehmeyer. Blymeyer was aware of who Rehmeyer was, and in fact had known him since he had been a small child. At the age of 5, Blymeyer had become seriously ill, and was unable to be cured by his own father and grandfather, fellow powwowers. The men, desperate to save the young boy, turned to Nelson Rehmeyer, who had healed him. Blymeyer was in disbelief that such a welcoming and helpful person could be the source of the hex, and returned to Knoll for confirmation. Knoll confirmed that the hex on him had been placed by Rehmeyer, and that Rehmeyer was also responsible for the curses that had been placed against the other workers at the cigar factory. Blymeyer told his colleagues at the factory about his findings, and also insisted that he had a solution for putting a stop to the hexes once and for all. It was necessary that the group would take Rehmeyer's copy of the book, The Long Lost Friend, and a lock of the man's hair to bury 6 feet underground. Blymeyer and a friend who had also been hexed, John Curry, made the decision to travel together to Rehmeyer's Hollow to gather the items they needed. On November 26, 1928, the pair left for the Hollow to confront Rehmeyer. Upon arrival, Blymeyer noticed that Rehmeyer was much meaner looking than he had remembered from his childhood, but proceeded to enter the home with an invitation from Rehmeyer himself. Blymeyer began asking Rehmeyer questions about the long-lost friend, as well as other things regarding powwowing, but skirted around the true reason why he had come for a visit. After chatting for a long while, it became late, and Rehmeyer invited the men to spend the night and sleep downstairs so they didn't have to travel in the dark. The men agreed, and once Rehmeyer was asleep, the men began looking for their necessary items. They set their sights on the book first, and were unable to find it. Despite not having the book they needed, the men conversed about whether it was necessary now to take a lock of Rehmeyer's hair, but it was decided that he was far too large for the men to hold down while they cut his hair. They left in the morning, deciding that they needed more help to accomplish their mission. The men returned with additional help the following evening, and Rehmeyer didn't even have a moment to wonder why they had come back for an additional visit. When Rehmeyer turned his back, the men leapt at him and tackled the older man to the floor while attempting to tie his legs with rope. The details here become varied, dependent on who is giving an account of the night, but the basic facts are that Rehmeyer was beaten and strangled to death. The 2 men who had accompanied Blymeyer originally had no intention of killing the man, and Blymeyer's intention of that evening are still unknown to this day, though it is possible that the murder was Blymeyer's original intention. After realizing that Rehmeyer was in fact dead, the trio attempted to make the scene look like a robbery, stealing money, but they left behind the book and did not take a lock of hair. The men also doused the house and the body in kerosene and lit it on fire, hoping that it would burn down the entire home. As they left, Rehmeyer was engulfed in flames, but the fire would mysteriously go out. It's thought that Rehmeyer may not have been dead yet upon being set on fire, and had moved just enough to extinguish the flames. But regardless of how the fire mysteriously extinguished itself, the evidence of the crimes was left behind and visible. The body of Rehmeyer was discovered by a neighbor 2 days later, and the crime shocked the community. Rehmeyer's former wife, Alice, noted to the police that Blymeyer and some other men had visited her, looking for her former husband, and the group was picked up by police as suspects in the heinous crime. Newspapers across the country sensationalized the story, calling it the YORK Witchcraft Murder. Journalists spent time recounting every strange detail of Blymeyer's experience with powwow and his obsession with the fact that he had been hexed. Due to the sensationalism of the story and the involvement of folk magic within the crime, folk magic was soon labeled as witchcraft. The press scorned any practitioners of folk magic, even if they practiced the most simplistic and respectful of healing services. America was shocked that these things were still taking place in the modern age, and folk magic, powwow, and witchcraft were all now lumped together and thought to be archaic and evil. One of the 3 men involved in the crime received a sentence of just 10 years in prison. Rehmeyer and his main accomplice both received life sentences for their involvement in the crime, but they were all eventually paroled, and all of the men led uneventful lives until their deaths. Due to their crimes and involvement with powwow and hexes, the public now believed that witchcraft of any form was a danger and a threat to society. And though powwow still had some defenders, it would never regain its appeal. Thank you for joining me for another episode of A Brief History. I hope you've enjoyed your time here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Sims-based true crime, conspiracy, and ghost stories. Thank you guys so much, and have a great day.